Hello, dreamers, and welcome to Dreaming Isle. I'm here to guide you into a calm and magical place tonight. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps bring more dreamers to our little corner of the stars. And if you'd like, share in the comments, what's the world outside your window like right now? Now, find your cozy spot. Let go of the day, and let the story begin. A pale fog clung to the winding road like wet silk, muffling every sound except the steady crunch of boots on gravel. The wanderer, a young man named Corin, pulled his cloak tighter, though the air was strangely warm despite the haze. He paused to listen. No wind, no birds, only the hush of a world holding its breath. He had been traveling for days without seeing another soul. The road twisted through black pines that loomed like watchful sentinels, their trunks vanishing into shifting veils of white. He felt the unnerving certainty that he was being watched, but when he turned, there was nothing except swirling mist. An old signpost appeared at a fork in the path, its letters faded and gouged. One arm pointed east, scrawled with the word Hollowmere. The other was illegible, rotted away. He considered turning back, but the path behind him had already vanished into dense fog. He chose Hollowmere. The name seemed to tremble on the air as he read it. He walked on, every step muffled and echoing strangely in the glow. Shape shifted at the edges of his vision. Twisted roots, half-buried stones, perhaps something more. As dusk fell, the fog thickened to an impenetrable curtain. Corin stumbled into a clearing. In the center stood a weathered stone arch, ancient and cracked, carved with symbols he couldn't read. It seemed impossibly out of place. When he brushed his fingers over the markings, a cold shiver ran through him. He heard whispering, words he couldn't quite catch, coming from nowhere and everywhere. His heart pounded. He drew back, watching the symbols glow faintly in the dusk. He didn't know why, but he felt he'd crossed a threshold he wouldn't easily return from. Corin awoke shivering, lying beside the ancient arch. The fog had thinned slightly, enough to reveal a narrow trail that hadn't been there before. He forced himself to rise, brushing dirt from his cloak. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a hollow silence. He followed the new path through gnarled trees until it led to the edge of a village. The cottages were old and leaning, thatched roofs caving in, doors ajar on rusty hinges. No smoke rose from chimneys. No dogs barked. He called out. His voice felt swallowed by the air, dead before it traveled a dozen paces. He walked down the lane, peering into doorways. Each house was abandoned but not ruined by time alone. Tables were still set for meals, chairs overturned as if the occupants had fled mid-supper. He found a child's doll lying in the dirt. Its glass eyes stared blankly, one cracked. The silence pressed on him like weight. He felt an urge to run but forced himself to search further. In the village square, a dry fountain stood, carved with the same symbols as the arch. He knelt to examine them. As his fingers traced a spiral, a cold wind gusted through the square. He heard the whispers again, stronger this time, words half-formed. His name seemed buried in them, though he'd told no one here. Shivering, he stood. The sun was gone, the world cast in gray twilight. He felt he didn't belong here, that no one did anymore. He turned toward the path leading out, though he couldn't be sure it would let him leave at all. He found the house at the edge of the village, larger than the others, shutters nailed shut. It smelled of old dust and mildew. Corin forced the door open and stepped inside, lighting a stub of candle he carried in his pack. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with decaying books. Papers littered the floor. A desk stood at the center, heaped with yellowed pages. He swept them aside until he found a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and flaking. He opened it carefully. The entries were terse and hurried. We heard them at the edge of the forest. Voices that weren't there. Another read. They come at dusk. We see shapes. We lock our doors, but it doesn't help. Corin swallowed. He turned more pages. The arch is older than the village. It was here before we built. We tried to destroy it, but it would not break. The last entry simply read, "Forgive us." He closed the book, breath shallow. Outside, something creaked in the fog. He snuffed the candle, heart racing. Through the cracked shutters, he saw only roiling gray. He couldn't stay here. He left the journal in his pack and stepped back onto the dirt road. The village felt even emptier now, as if it had noticed him and was waiting for him to act. Leaving the village behind, Corin followed the road until it dwindled into a narrow, rutted path. The fog gathered in heavy curtains, making every tree loom like a dark figure. He tried not to imagine hands reaching for him from the mist. He paused at a strange sound, soft, rhythmic. It almost sounded like chanting. He turned in a slow circle, peering into the gloom, but saw nothing. The chanting faded when he moved, but if he stopped, it resumed. He walked faster. Branches clawed at his cloak. The path twisted through the forest until he reached a clearing where the fog thinned slightly. In the center was a ring of standing stones, each carved with the same symbols from the arch and fountain. The chanting was clearer here, though still distant. He felt a pull, like gravity in his chest. He forced himself forward and touched one of the stones. A shock went through him. Images filled his mind, shapes of people kneeling, hands raised, their mouths open in silent cries. He jerked his hand back. The vision vanished, replaced by the empty clearing. His breath came in short gasps. He felt watched again. He took the path on the other side of the clearing without looking back. The chanting fell silent, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the stones had marked him somehow, as if he had been recognized by something ancient and patient. Corin walked until his legs ached, but the forest never changed. The fog ebbed and thickened in cycles, swallowing the world whole before revealing glimpses of moonlight. He collapsed beside a fallen log to rest. As he lay there, he heard the crack of twigs. He froze. A figure emerged from the mist, a man wrapped in dark, tattered robes, face shadowed by a hood. "Lost, are you?" the figure rasped. His voice was low and dry, as though unused for years. Corin tried to speak, but his mouth was dry. Finally he managed. "Who are you?" The figure ignored the question. "You shouldn't have touched the stones. They know you now." Corin's pulse hammered. "What knows me?" The figure tilted his head, but shifting enough to reveal pale eyes that didn't seem to blink. "The old ones. The ones who listen when no one speaks. They have waited for someone to wake them." A chill went through Corin. "What do they want?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned and beckoned. "If you want to survive, follow me." Corin hesitated, every instinct telling him to run. But the fog was thick and endless. Alone, he would be lost forever. He stood, clutching his pack, and followed the silent guide into the swallowing mist, hoping he hadn't just traded one doom for another. Corin followed the hooded figure through winding forest paths so narrow they seemed to close behind them. The fog shifted around them like something alive, curling in tendrils that caressed his face. Though he stumbled often, the stranger moved with unsettling ease, never turning to help or speak. Eventually, the trees parted to reveal a chasm cutting the forest in two. A rope bridge spanned it, old and frayed, planks slick with moisture. Below, no river ran, only darkness, an empty void that seemed to swallow all sound. The guide stopped at the bridge's edge. "Do not look down," he said, voice like brittle paper. Corin's heart pounded. The wind here was colder, biting through his cloak. He glanced once into the chasm and felt dizzy, the blackness shifting, swirling with something like distant shapes. He jerked his gaze away. The guide stepped onto the bridge without hesitation. Corin followed, gripping the ropes so hard his knuckles ached. Every step made the planks creak and sway. The fog closed around them, cutting off the opposite side from view. Halfway across, the whispers returned, louder than ever. They seemed to come from beneath, rising through the chasm. Words he almost understood twisted around his ears, promising secrets, begging him to let go. Corin clenched his teeth. He forced himself onward, the rope biting his palms. The guide never turned, only walking steadily. When Corin's foot slipped, he caught himself with a strangled cry. The voices cackled in delight, mocking him. Finally, they reached the other side. Corin fell to his knees, gasping. The guide waited in silence until Corin stood again. "They know you crossed," the man said softly. "Now they'll follow." Corin's mouth was dry. "Where are you taking me?" The hooded figure didn't answer. Instead, he turned and continued down the path, leaving Corin to scramble after him, the whispers fading but never gone. They pressed on for hours through a forest that seemed to resist them, branches clawing at Corin's cloak and roots tripping his steps. When the fog cleared just enough, Corin saw strange symbols carved into tree trunks, spirals, and eye shapes that seemed to shift when he blinked. Finally, they emerged into a clearing. At its center stood a squat stone building, walls cracked, roof sagging. Moss and vines obscured much of it, but a doorway yawned open, pitch black inside. "This is the shrine," the guide rasped. Corin hesitated at the threshold. The air within was cold and still, like a tomb. He glanced at the hooded figure. "Why bring me here?" "To learn," was the only reply. Inside, the walls were covered in carvings so ancient they were nearly worn smooth. Some depicted robed figures kneeling before towering shapes with too many eyes. Others showed people running, their mouths open in silent screams. At the center of the floor was a shallow pit, filled with ashes. Symbols had been traced in the soot, forming a crude map. Corin leaned closer and saw the archway, the village, the bridge. Lines led away to places he didn't recognize. A whisper slithered through the shrine, as though the walls themselves were speaking. Corin jerked back. "Do not run," the guide warned. "They see you. You might as well see them." Corin's pulse raced. He forced himself to look again. The symbols seemed to shift, one line now pointing directly at the pit's edge. At his feet, he swallowed hard. "What happens if I keep following?" The guide's pale eyes gleamed in the dark. "You might learn the truth, or you might be devoured by it." Corin's fingers trembled as he traced the map. He realized he had no choice. He couldn't go back. He turned away from the pit, feeling the cold weight of watching eyes, and nodded once. "Show me the next path." They left the shrine in silence, pushing into a denser forest where the fog took on a sickly green hue. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic. The guide's robes brushed noiselessly over ferns and tangled roots, but Corin stumbled often, breath rasping in the quiet. The trees here were twisted, their trunks gnarled like grasping fingers. Every so often they passed stones half buried in moss, carved with more of the ever-present symbols. The fog seemed to form shapes, a woman weeping, a hunched man with too many arms, before dissolving again. Corin tried not to look. When he did, the shapes sometimes moved toward him. He felt their chill against his skin even when they vanished. Eventually, they reached a narrow glade where the ground dipped and filled with water, black and glassy. The guide stopped. "Do not speak here," he hissed. Corin nodded. He felt the weight of the air, heavy with unspoken words. As they skirted the edge of the pool, he saw reflections of things not there, tall robed shapes behind them, eyes like coals in the gloom. He bit his lip until it bled, refusing to scream. At the far end of the glade, a trail of standing stones led into darker woods. Each stone had a single eye carved into it. Corin shivered as they passed. The eyes seemed to follow, unblinking, knowing. When they emerged from the line of stones, the guide finally spoke. "This place is old. Older than the village, older than the arch. The first settlers thought they could tame it. They failed." Corin swallowed. "What is it?" The guide's voice was nearly a whisper. "It is hunger. Memory. It does not forget who walks its paths." Corin shivered. He felt marked, seen in ways he couldn't understand. But he followed, too afraid to turn back into the green-lit fog. The path narrowed until it was little more than a tunnel of intertwined branches. The air grew colder, each breath a visible cloud. Corin's teeth chattered as he stumbled along behind the guide, who moved without seeming to feel the chill. Finally, they emerged into a cavern hollowed from living roots. Massive trees formed walls and a ceiling of twisted wood, their roots braided and fused into shelves that held ancient books. Candles burned without being lit, their pale flames revealing motes of dust that drifted like slow snow. Corin's eyes widened. He had never seen so many books in one place, though many were rotted and crumbling. The guide turned to him. "Read." Corin hesitated. The first book he touched fell apart in his hands. He picked another, its leather cover flaking. The pages inside were covered in symbols, some matching those he'd seen on stones and shrines. He could not read them, but they made his head ache. He flipped through, images flashing in his mind. The archway opening like a mouth, the village drowning in fog, figures in robes chanting in a circle of stones. He dropped the book, gasping. "Keep reading," the guide ordered. Corin tried another. This one had crude drawings of the forest with paths marked in blood-red ink, warnings scrawled in a language he almost understood. "Do not cross. Do not look." He looked up at the guide. "These don't help me." The hooded man's eyes gleamed. "They tell you enough. They tell you there is no safe path." Corin shuddered. He felt the library watching him, the roots shifting, listening. He realized the forest itself might remember every word ever written here, waiting for someone foolish enough to read them. He closed the book with shaking hands, determined to leave, but the guide blocked the exit, voice low. "You cannot unlearn what you've seen." Corin and the guide left the root library behind, the candles guttering as they passed. The fog had grown thicker again, like wool stuffed into every gap between trees. Shapes moved within it, whispering just beyond sight. They followed a winding path lined with stones carved in eye motifs, the irises inlaid with something that glinted like black glass. The eyes seemed to watch them, and Corin could almost hear their blinking. They reached a clearing perfectly round, ringed with more of the watching stones. The fog refused to enter, hanging like a curtain at the edge. In the center was a circular depression in the earth filled with dark water, unmoving as polished obsidian. The guide stopped at the edge. "Look," he commanded. Corin hesitated. The water felt wrong, but he knelt and peered in. At first, he saw only his own haggard reflection, pale and wide-eyed. Then it shifted. He saw the archway again, glowing in the dusk. The abandoned village. The standing stones. But more than that, he saw shapes moving in the fog, tall, faceless beings in tattered robes. Their hands were too long, fingers like roots, nails clicking like beetle shells. They walked the same paths he had, always behind him, watching, waiting. He jerked back, breath ragged. The guide's voice was quiet. "You see them now. They've always been here." Corin swallowed bile. "What do they want?" "To remember," the guide said. "To be remembered. To be let in." Corin shook his head. "I won't." The guide tilted his head. "You already have." Corin stood slowly, fighting the urge to run. The eyes carved in the stones gleamed in the gloom, watching, unblinking, patient. He realized he would never be unseen again. They left the circle of eyes behind, the fog drawing tight around them like a noose. Corin felt each step grow heavier, as if the earth clung to his boots. The guide said nothing, his pale eyes occasionally glancing back to ensure Corin followed. Soon they reached a grove where the trees stood in unnatural patterns, rows and spirals that twisted the path. The air was thick with scent of wet soil and rotting leaves. Strange pale flowers bloomed among the roots, their petals trembling though there was no wind. As they walked, Corin realized the fog here wasn't silent. It murmured with a chorus of voices too low to make out. He strained to listen, certain he heard his own name spoken in 100 different tongues. He paused beside one of the strange flowers. It seemed to lean toward him, its center opening like a mouth. He jerked away as it expelled a cold breath, whispering words that slid into his ears even though he clamped them shut. "Remember, let us in." Corin stumbled, heart racing. He turned to the guide, who watched him with unreadable calm. "What is this place?" Corin demanded, voice shaking. The guide gestured around them. "The Grove of the Lost." Those who listened, those who couldn't turn away. Corin's gaze fell on the ground. At first he thought it was tangled roots, but he saw fingers among them, bone white and clutching the earth. faces half buried, mouths open in eternal screams. He felt his stomach turn. He wanted to run, to flee this nightmare, but the guide moved on, ignoring the grove's whispers. Corin followed, eyes fixed on the guide's back, refusing to look at the flowers that now leaned after him, their petals whispering secrets he refused to hear. They left the grove behind, but Corin felt the voices lingering in his skull, repeating in half-heard words. The guide led him into another part of the forest where the fog was thin but the gloom deepened, the canopy so dense it turned dusk into near night. Here the path was lit by pale, flickering lights. Corin squinted, realizing they were not lanterns but skulls set on stakes, their hollow eyes glowing with ghostly fire. Each flame guttered as they passed, casting long, twitching shadows. Corin's breath hitched. "What are these?" he asked hoarsely. "Wards," the guide replied. "Old magic. Warnings." "Warnings to leave?" "To stay on the path," the guide said without looking back. Corin swallowed. He forced himself to keep moving, though the skull lights seemed to watch him. He tried not to think about who they had been. The ground beneath the path was unnaturally smooth, worn by many feet. As they rounded a bend, the path widened. Carved into the soil were hundreds of symbols, spirals, eyes, jagged runes that hurt to look at. The guide slowed, tracing one with a long finger. "They tried to bind it here," he murmured, "to keep it asleep." Corin felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What is it?" The guide glanced at him. "Memory. Hunger. The old thing in the fog. It has no name anymore." Corin clenched his fists. "How do we stop it?" The guide gave a thin, humorless laugh. "You don't. You only survive it." Corin's mouth went dry. He looked ahead at the wavering skull lights, realizing that the path was the only thing holding back the darkness pressing in from all sides. He felt trapped, herded forward into secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to know. They emerged at last into a clearing where an ancient chapel squatted, half swallowed by earth and vines. Its roof sagged, spires snapped like broken fingers. Stained glass windows were cracked, but glowed with faint light from within. Corin hesitated at the threshold. The air felt colder here, sharp enough to sting his lungs. He looked at the guide, who nodded once. Inside, the chapel was lined with rotting pews. An altar of black stone dominated the front, covered in dust and moss. Symbols had been chiseled into its surface so deeply they seemed to bleed darkness. Candles burned along the walls, their flames blue and cold. Corin walked slowly between the pews. His eyes caught strange shapes in the stained glass. Figures kneeling before towers of eyes, forests choking with fog, robed shapes merging with trees. Each window was a warning, a prophecy of corruption. He reached the altar and felt something shift in the air. A whisper, clear this time, "You are welcome here." He staggered back. The guide remained in the doorway. "It knows you," he said quietly. Corin's voice cracked. "What does it want?" "To be remembered," the guide answered. "To be real. The more you learn, the more real it becomes." Corin felt his heart thunder. "Then why bring me here?" The guide's expression didn't change. "Because it has chosen you. You can turn back, but you will never be free of it. Or you can go on and learn how to live with what you are becoming." Corin swallowed, chest tight. He looked at the altar, the flickering blue flames, the stained glass eyes watching him. He felt a cold acceptance seep into his bones. He turned back to the guide and nodded. "Show me the way." They left the chapel in silence. The fog thickened again, but the cold blue glow of the chapel's candles seemed to linger in Corin's vision. His head throbbed with the weight of what he'd seen, symbols dancing behind his eyelids even when he blinked. The guide led him to a hollow where the ground sank into black mud. In the center was a stone slab, carved with deep grooves that channeled liquid, some dark ink, some dried blood. Symbols were etched so deeply they seemed like open wounds. Corin felt bile rise. "What is this place?" "A scriptorium," the guide replied softly, "where the first settlers tried to contain it, to name it. They thought words could hold it in place." Corin shuddered. Did it work? The guides had dipped in what might have been a nod or a shrug. For a time, he gestured at the slab. "You must add your mark." Corin recoiled. "Why?" "To show you understand," the guide said. "It will not let you leave until you do." Corin stared at the grooves. He realized the symbols carved here matched those in the books, the ones that made his head ache. His fingers trembled as he picked up a splinter of blackened wood from the ground, dipped it in the drying ink and blood. He began to carve his own symbol. Not one he understood, but one that felt right. An eye within a spiral, a memory of the fog. As he finished, the wind gusted through the hollow, making the mud ripple like water. The whispers returned, pleased, eager. "Remember us. Let us in." Corin dropped the wood and stepped back, heart hammering. He felt dizzy, sick, but the guide's pale eyes watched him with something like approval. "You're ready," he rasped. Corin swallowed, wiping the blood and ink from his fingers, and nodded once. They left the hollow behind, the fog trailing after them like a living thing. Corin's fingers still tingled from the carving, his mark joining the countless others in that ancient scriptorium. They traveled until the trees opened onto a clearing filled with broken stones and half-buried statues. Moss-covered faces stared skyward, mouths open in silent wails. Corin felt their eyes on him even though they were blind. In the center of the clearing stood a figure draped in rotting funeral shrouds. Its head was bowed, arms dangling. Corin stopped short, heart racing. The guide raised a hand. "Do not run." The shrouded figure twitched, lifting its head slowly. Where its face should have been was only a black void, leaking tendrils of fog. A voice emerged from that emptiness, rasping, layered with many tones. "You walk our path." Corin's mouth went dry. He forced himself to speak. "What do you want from me?" The revenant tilted its head, the fog twisting in unnatural patterns. "We want you to see, to remember, to tell them." "Tell them what?" "That we wait, that we never left." Corin shivered as the revenant's form shifted, stretching, splitting into dozens of shapes before reforming. "The fog is memory. It holds us. We cannot leave. But you can carry us." The guide watched him passively. Corin's voice broke. "I don't want to. You already have." Corin felt a weight settle on his shoulders, heavy and cold. The revenant lowered its head again. The clearing fell silent except for the hiss of fog through broken stones. The guide turned. "Come," he said softly. "There's more to see." Corin followed, though every part of him screamed to run. He felt the revenant's gaze even as he left, knowing he would never forget its words. They pressed deeper into the fog-choked forest, the air growing colder with every step. Corin's breath fogged before him, mingling with the mist like smoke. His legs trembled from exhaustion, but the guide never slowed. Ahead, a dim light appeared, bobbing in the glow. Corin squinted until the shape resolved, a figure draped in gray rags, carrying a lantern that glowed with sickly green fire. The figure's face was hidden by a veil of tattered cloth. It turned toward them, and the lantern flame flared. The guide raised a hand in greeting. The figure inclined its head slowly, joints creaking like old wood. Corin's voice trembled. "Who is that?" "The lantern bearer," the guide said. "The one who lights the paths that should remain dark." The figure beckoned with a skeletal hand, the green light illuminating symbols carved into its wrist. Corin hesitated, but the guide nodded. They followed the lantern bearer down a narrow path hemmed in by thorns. The green glow made the fog seethe and twist, revealing shapes within, faces frozen in terror, arms reaching. Corin tried not to look, but couldn't help glimpsing their empty eyes. The lantern bearer never spoke. Its flame guttered and hissed, casting shadows that moved even when they stood still. Corin felt a pressure in his head, a buzzing behind his eyes. Every now and then the path split, but the bearer always chose the darker fork. Finally, they reached a small clearing where ancient stones ringed a dry well. The bearer stopped, lowering the lantern until its light pooled around the crumbling stones. Symbols were carved all along the well's rim, deep and precise. The guide turned to Corin. "Look inside." Corin swallowed. He stepped forward and peered down. He saw no bottom, only darkness that seemed to move. Faint whispers rose, calling his name in voices not his own. The lantern bearer lifted the lantern higher. The glow illuminated the words carved in the stone, "Let us speak." Corin jerked back. The lantern bearer faded into the mist, taking its sickly glow with it. The guide waited until the last glimmer vanished before turning away from the well. "Why did you make me look?" Corin demanded, voice hoarse. The guide's pale eyes were calm. "So you would know it waits for you." Corin's fists clenched. "I don't want this. I didn't ask for it." "You were chosen the moment you entered the fog," the guide said quietly. "It marked you." Corin felt sick. He turned in a slow circle. The fog was thicker now, pressing in. Shapes shifted and washed from the edges of vision. The guide continued walking. Corin followed, too afraid to be alone. They emerged into another clearing, this one marked by a circle of stones arranged like teeth. In the center sat a flat altar slicked with old blood. Corin recoiled. "What is this?" "A place of bargaining," the guide said. "Long ago they tried to make a pact with what lives in the fog. An agreement. Sacrifice for safety." Corin's mouth went dry. "Did it work?" The guide shook his head. For a time, whispers rose from the altar. Corin heard promises in them. Safety, power, knowledge. They slithered into his ears, curling around his thoughts. Give. Take. Balance. He backed away, heart thudding. The guide watched him carefully. "It will offer you a bargain. It always does. I don't want anything from it." The guide's lips twitched in a humorless smile. "You think you have a choice? It's not about wanting. It's about what it takes." Corin turned from the altar, pressing his hands over his ears to block the voices. But the words were already there, seating themselves in his mind. "We can protect you. We can give you what you seek." He shivered, feeling the fog close in tighter than ever. They left the bargaining circle behind, though Corin felt its promises clinging to him like spider webs. The guide said nothing, his silent form leading Corin ever deeper into the woods where the trees grew so close their branches knitted into a black canopy. They arrived at a sunken hollow where shapes twisted in the gloom. Corin squinted, realizing the shapes were people, bound to trees by lengths of iron chain. Their faces were pale and slack, eyes open but unseeing. He gagged, while rising in his throat. "What is this?" "Those who tried to bargain," the guide said. "Those who thought they could control it." Corin stepped closer. One of the chained figures stirred, its eyes rolling in its skull. Its lips moved soundlessly before cracking open in a hoarse whisper. "Run." Corin stumbled back. Another figure twisted, joints popping. "It lies." Dozens of voices rose at once, pleading, warning, sobbing. Corin clamped his hands over his ears, but the words forced their way in. "Don't listen. Remember us. Break the chains." He looked at the guide in horror. "Can't we help them?" The guide's face was grave. "They cannot be freed. They're part of it now." Corin felt hot tears sting his eyes. He backed away as the chained ones writhed and shrieked. The fog pressed down like a lid, thick with the stench of rust and rot. The guide placed a hand on Corin's shoulder. "Remember them," he said. "That's all you can do." Corin shook his head, but he couldn't look away. The eyes of the chained ones followed him as they left the hollow, their whispers trailing him into the endless fog. They walked for hours, or maybe days. Time felt meaningless in the fog. Corin's body ached. His mind burned with exhaustion and the relentless memories of what he'd seen. At last, they reached a rise in the land, where two massive stone pillars loomed like skeletal fingers. Between them swirled fog so dense it was almost solid, a living wall of gray. Symbols carved into the pillars glowed faintly as they approached. Standing before the gate was a figure in robes of tattered silver, its face hidden by an iron mask carved with runes. It held a staff crowned with a cracked crystal that pulsed with a dull, sickly light. Corin felt fear clamp around his heart. The figure didn't move as they approached. The guide stopped. "This is the Watcher. It guards the threshold." "Threshold the what?" Corin whispered. The guide's eyes were grim. "The heart of the fog, where memory becomes flesh." The Watcher's staff struck the ground with a metallic clang. The fog parted slightly, revealing only swirling darkness beyond. "You have seen," the Watcher said in a voice that echoed with many layers. "You carry us. Do you accept it?" Corin's mouth went dry. He shook his head, but no words came. The Watcher turned its masked face toward the guide. "He has not chosen. Then he will be forced to choose," the guide said softly. The Watcher raised its staff. The runes on the pillars flared brighter, and the fog between them churned like a storm. Shapes moved within, tall, robed, faceless things beckoning. Corin felt the pull in his chest, the same gravity that had followed him since he first touched the arch. He tried to turn away, but his feet wouldn't move. "Come," the voices whispered. "Remember us." He closed his eyes, shaking. The fog pressed against him like a lover's breath. The Watcher lowered its staff, the runes dimming. The guide laid a hand on Corin's arm, steadying him. "There is no turning back," he murmured. Corin swallowed hard. He looked once more at the swirling wall of fog between the pillars. Shapes writhed within, their whispers now pleading, insistent. "Let us in." He felt something cold in his chest, acceptance or surrender, he couldn't tell. He stepped forward. The fog parted around him like curtains pulled by unseen hands. Inside was utter darkness. The ground beneath his boots turned to damp stone steps that spiraled downward. He hesitated at the first step, but the guide was already behind him, forcing him onward. They descended in silence, the whispers growing louder with every step. The air was thick, hard to breathe. He felt them pressing in around him, memories not his own flooding his mind, births and deaths, screams and laughter, all tangled together. He lost count of the steps. Time unraveled. The guide's presence was the only anchor he had. At last they emerged into a vast cavern where the fog pooled like water, rippling with dim light. Stone pillars rose from the depths, carved with symbols that pulsed like living wounds. Shapes moved among them, shadows with too many limbs, faceless things with jaws like gaping wounds. Corin staggered, the memories crashing over him. He fell to his knees, gasping. The guide stood over him, voice low. "This is the heart, the place it remembers, where it becomes real." Corin raised his head, tears streaming down his face. The whispers surrounded him. "Remember us. Let us speak." He realized there was no escape, only the choice of how much of himself he was willing to give. He clenched his fists and chose to keep walking. They walked across slick stone, the cavern echoing with distant whispers. Fog pooled in channels cut into the floor, glowing faintly from within. Corin tried not to slip, but every step felt treacherous. Ahead, the path narrowed into an archway carved from living rock. Symbols writhed across its surface like living things. The guide placed a hand on the arch and nodded for Corin to follow. Inside, the walls were covered in faces, dozens, maybe hundreds, carved in exquisite detail. Eyes closed, mouths half open as if to speak. Corin shuddered. "They remember," the guide said softly. "Who are they?" Corin's voice cracked. "Those who came before. Those who tried to bargain, to control, to forget. The fog keeps them." Corin reached out, fingers trembling. One face seemed familiar, a woman with high cheekbones and sad eyes. As he brushed the stone, her eyes opened. He jerked back, heart pounding. She whispered in a cracked voice, "Help us." The other faces stirred, their eyelids fluttering. A rising chorus of pleading filled the chamber. "Free us. Remember us. Don't leave." Corin clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices wormed their way in. He turned to the guide, eyes wide with terror. "I can't help them." The guide's face was grim. "No, but you can choose not to become one of them. How? The guide didn't answer. Instead, he turned and continued down the passage, the faces wailing after them. Corin forced himself to follow, legs shaking. As he passed, the faces fell silent, their eyes watching him, remembering him. He felt the weight of their gaze press against his back like a promise or a threat, pushing him onward into the dark. They left the chamber of faces behind and entered a corridor so narrow Corin had to turn sideways to pass. The air was damp and cold, seeping into his bones. Symbols pulsed on the walls with faint red light, casting sickly shadows. At the end of the corridor lay a round chamber. In its center stood a massive stone slab etched with runes so deep they bled darkness. Heavy chains snaked across the floor, coiling around the slab like iron serpents. Corin's stomach turned. What is this place? The guide's voice was flat. The Shrine of Binding. Where they tried to hold it. Where they failed. Corin approached the slab, eyes scanning the chains. They trembled as if alive, scraping faintly over the stone. He reached out and felt a vibration, whispers traveling through the metal. We are bound. We are hungry. He snatched his hand back. What did they bind? The memory, the guide said. The hunger. It is not a thing with a name. It is every forgotten promise, every buried guilt. It feeds on what we try to forget. Corin shivered. He looked at the chains. Why doesn't it stay bound? Because forgetting is easier than remembering. And so it grows. The whispers rose, louder now. We know you. You remember. Corin staggered back. The chains rattled, drawn toward him like eager hands. The guide stepped forward, raising his own hand. The chains froze, the room falling silent but for the slow drip of water from the ceiling. Do not give it your name, the guide warned, or it will hold you here forever. Corin clenched his jaw, forcing himself to look away. The chains writhed one last time before falling still, as if disappointed. He turned and followed the guide out, the whispers trailing them like phantom chains seeking new prey. Beyond the shrine they found a tunnel sloping downward, carved from black stone veined with silver. The fog here was thicker, luminous and shifting colors like oil on water. They emerged into a vast chamber draped with heavy fabric that hung from unseen rafters. The veils swayed though there was no breeze, their patterns shifting between symbols, faces, and unreadable words. Corin hesitated at the threshold. The guide gestured for him to enter. He stepped forward. The veils brushed his face, cold and damp. Whispers rose around him, voices layered so deeply they blurred into a hum. Each veil he parted revealed another behind it, an endless labyrinth of soft walls. He turned to speak, but the guide was gone. Panic surged in his chest. He spun in place, but saw only moving veils. Corin. His name whispered from every direction. He pushed through, frantic. The faces in the fabric watched him, mouths opening in silent screams or sly smiles. Symbols danced along the weave, glowing briefly before fading. You cannot leave. You belong here. We know you. He shouted for the guide, but his voice fell flat. He pushed harder, tearing through veil after veil until he stumbled into a clearing at the center of the maze. There, a single veil hung from ceiling to floor, blacker than any shadow. It pulsed like a living heart. Speak, it demanded. Corin trembled. He shook his head, refusing. Speak your truth. He clenched his teeth, tears streaming. At last he whispered, I'm afraid. The veil shuddered. The room fell silent. The fabric parted before him, revealing the guide waiting beyond. Corin fell to his knees, gasping. The guide reached down and hauled him up without a word. Together they left the chamber behind, the veils falling still, listening. They emerged into a lower cavern where the fog coiled in lazy spirals. A pale light emanated from a wide, shallow pool at the center, its surface smooth as glass. Symbols circled the water's edge, carved deep and filled with black resin that gleamed in the glow. The guide stopped. This is the memory pool. Corin swallowed. He felt the air vibrate with whispers. What does it do? It shows what you carry, the guide replied. What you've tried to forget. Corin shook his head. I don't want to see. The guide's voice was quiet. It's not a choice. The pool rippled without wind. Corin's reflection split and twisted. He saw himself as a child, crying beside a grave. A teenager turning away from a friend in need. An adult running from everything he feared. The water darkened. He saw the faces from the village. The chained ones. The revenant in its shroud. The fog swallowing them all. He fell to his knees. Tears splashed into the pool, merging with the visions. The water churned, the whispers rising in a pleading chorus. Remember, do not turn away. Corin sobbed. He pressed his palms to the edge, forcing himself to look. The images burned into him, each memory cutting deep. Finally, the water stilled. His reflection returned, older, eyes hollow but unflinching. The whispers faded to silence. The guide placed a hand on his shoulder. You understand now. Corin nodded slowly. He felt empty, scraped clean and raw. Come, the guide said. There is one last place to see. Corin stood on trembling legs, the pool at his back, its surface blank as if nothing had ever stirred it at all. They left the memory pool behind, entering a narrow passage that twisted like the inside of some vast creature. The walls pulsed faintly, slick with moisture, symbols scrawled in red that gleamed when the guide's lantern passed. Corin felt dizzy, memories pressing on him with every step. He heard voices of the dead, the lost, the forgotten. They did not accuse, but neither did they forgive. At last the passage opened into a colossal chamber, the ceiling lost in darkness. Fog churned at its center like a living thing, rising in slow, coiling tendrils. Shapes moved within it, tall, robed, faceless, shifting with every blink. The guide stopped. This is the heart. Corin shivered. The fog seemed aware of him. The whispers were deafening now, layered so deeply he felt them in his bones. You came. You see us. You remember. He covered his ears, but it didn't help. Tears streamed down his face. What do you want from me? We want you to carry us. Corin fell to his knees. The guide's voice was low, almost kind. This is the choice. To hold them, to be the memory, or to forget and let them consume. Corin sobbed. He remembered the faces in the walls, the chained ones, the revenant's promise. He felt the weight of their stories pressing into him, pleading not to be lost. He looked up at the swirling fog. I don't want to, but you will. The guide watched silently as Corin lowered his head. The fog pressed closer, tendrils brushing his face like a lover's caress. Corin drew a shaking breath. He didn't speak. He only listened, and the fog whispered every secret it had ever kept. Corin knelt in the swirling fog, his body shaking with the weight of voices pressing into him. They spoke in overlapping tongues, each word both prayer and demand. The guide remained at his side, silent, unmoving. Do you accept us? The fog asked, though the question felt rhetorical. The voices slithered through Corin's mind, curling around old memories, rooting into places he had kept hidden even from himself. He clenched his teeth. He thought of the faces carved in stone, the chained ones crying out, the revenant with its empty void of a face. All of them waiting, hoping to be remembered. Why me, he rasped. Because you stayed. Because you listened. He sobbed, the sound muffled by the pressing fog. His arms wrapped around himself, as if he could hold in everything trying to spill out. The memories were too much, his failures, his fears, the horrors he'd seen in this place. The guide finally spoke, voice low and firm. You can refuse. You can forget, but you will leave them behind. Corin shook his head. He remembered the child's doll in the abandoned village, the altar with its pleading whispers, the chained ones twisting in agony. He remembered them all. He drew a ragged breath. I won't forget. The fog surged around him, tendrils wrapping his arms and chest, cold as grave soil. The voices rose in a wailing chorus that shook the walls of the cavern. Symbols carved into the floor flared to life in lines of ghostly fire. Then carry us. The world spun. Corin felt himself falling, sinking into the fog. The guide's hand rested on his shoulder, an anchor against the darkness. When the voices finally fell silent, he was kneeling on bare stone. The fog receded to the edges of the chamber. Corin stood, breath shaky but steady. He felt them inside him, quiet, waiting, remembered. The guide nodded once. "It is done." Silence settled over the cavern like dust. The symbols on the floor faded, leaving only the cold, slick stone beneath Corin's boots. The fog ebbed to the walls, thick but no longer seething with hungry life. Corin wiped tears from his face, smearing dirt across his cheeks. He looked at the guide, whose pale eyes studied him with a rare flicker of something like respect. "Is it over?" Corin's voice cracked. The guide's expression remained unreadable. "It is never over. But you have chosen." Corin swallowed hard. He felt heavy, full of whispers that no longer clamored for attention, but settled like sediment in his mind. Memories not his own, stories half finished, tragedies never spoken. "Can I leave?" The guide turned, gesturing toward a narrow archway carved from black rock. Beyond it, a stairway spiraled upward, lit by a pale, cold glow. "This is the way out." Corin hesitated. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself to move. The guide followed in silence. Each step felt like dragging chains behind him, though none clanked on the stone. As they climbed, the air grew lighter. The fog thinned, no longer pressing in like a living thing. Corin felt each breath fill his lungs more easily, though the weight inside him remained. They emerged onto a forest path washed in pale dawn light. Birds sang somewhere unseen. Dew coated the leaves, reflecting the soft glow of morning. Corin blinked, eyes watering at the brightness after so long in darkness. He turned to the guide. "What happens now?" The guide inclined his head. "You carry them. You remember. That is enough." Corin felt tears threaten again. He turned and faced the path ahead, feeling the memories stir within him like sleeping animals. He exhaled slowly and took his first step into the waking world. Corin walked through the quiet forest, every sound sharp after the muffled silence of the fog. The dawn light made the dew on the leaves sparkle like scattered stars. Birds sang, unaware of the weight he carried. He paused at a fork in the path. An old wooden sign pointed in two directions, one toward a village whose name was faded beyond reading, the other toward Hollowmere. He remembered standing here once before, fog swirling, lost and afraid. Now the fog was gone, but the memory of it clung to him. He could still feel the cold breath of it in his lungs, the whispers pressing against his mind. "Remember us." He turned slowly in place, scanning the trees. Symbols were carved into their trunks, faint but unmistakable. Spirals, eyes, warnings. He felt them pulsing with awareness, no longer simply marks but words written for him. Corin brushed his fingers over one. It was cold and slick with dew. He shivered. "You're still here," he whispered. The wind shifted, stirring the leaves. He thought he heard them sigh in reply. He chose the path toward Hollowmere. His boots crunched on old gravel. He knew it would lead him to empty cottages, to a fountain carved with symbols, to silence that was anything but empty. But he couldn't turn away. Not now. As he walked, he felt the whispers inside him wake and murmur, not pleading anymore, but telling stories. Names, faces, moments lost to time. He listened. When he reached the edge of the village, the fog was gone, but the air felt thick with memory. He paused, hand resting on the gate, breathing deeply. He would walk every street. He would remember every detail, because someone had to. Hollowmere stood silent in the gray dawn. Corin walked slowly through its ruined lanes, boots scuffing dust that had lain undisturbed for years. Doors hung crooked, windows gaped like blind eyes. He paused before the dry fountain in the center of the square. The symbols carved into its stone were clear now without the fog to obscure them. He traced them carefully, feeling them shudder under his fingers as if alive. Faces flickered behind his eyes. the villagers who had fled, the child who dropped the doll, the keeper who wrote in his journal until the ink ran dry. He opened his pack and pulled out the old journal, its pages brittle. He sat on the fountain's edge and read the entries aloud, voice raw. We heard them at the edge of the forest. Voices that weren't there. They come at dusk. We see shapes. Forgive us. The words seemed to sink into the air, soaking the silent houses, the cracked cobblestones. He felt the weight of them pressing into the earth. He closed the journal gently and set it beside him. The whispers in his head were quiet, listening. I remember you, he said. His voice shook. I won't forget. A breeze stirred the village, rustling dry leaves. He imagined it carried the words into every corner, every abandoned home. He stood slowly. The sun broke through the trees, sending pale beams across the square. Dust motes danced in the light. Corin took one last look at Hollowmere, memorizing every leaning wall, every cracked window. Then he turned away, leaving the village behind, but carrying it with him. Corin walked along the road as the morning brightened. Birds called from the trees, and the breeze felt warm against his face. The world seemed unchanged, but he knew it was not. He felt the weight in his chest, a hush of countless voices lying still, waiting, not demanding now, but present, remembered. He paused at a bend in the road where the fog had first swallowed him days ago. The trees stood quiet, shafts of light breaking through their branches. He knelt and pressed his palm to the dirt. I remember. The wind sighed, bending grass, rustling branches. He closed his eyes and listened, hearing no whispers but feeling their memory press gentle against his thoughts. He stood and continued on, boots scuffing the familiar path. He passed old markers carved with symbols now dulled with age. They no longer glowed, but he traced them anyway, feeling them warm beneath his touch. Ahead, the path forked once more. One way led deeper into unknown woods. The other toward distant hills where smoke curled from chimneys. He took a deep breath. He turned toward the hills. As he walked, he rehearsed the stories in his mind. The faces in the walls, the chained ones, the revenant's warning. He would carry them all. He would speak of them when asked. Not to frighten, but to remember. The road stretched before him, bright in the morning sun. He felt the whispers inside him quiet and waiting. He walked on, no longer lost, because someone had to carry the memory, and he chose to be that someone. Corin followed the winding road until the hills rolled open before him, fields dotted with grazing animals in the distant outline of a village. Smoke curled from chimneys, and for the first time in what felt like years, he smelled baking bread on the breeze. He entered the village at dusk, the lanterns glowing warm against the encroaching twilight. Children played in the dirt lanes, laughing without fear. People nodded politely as he passed, unaware of the weight he carried. At the village inn, he pushed open the heavy door and was greeted by firelight and the low rumble of conversation. He paused on the threshold, suddenly uncertain. The voices in his head stirred, shifting like leaves in wind. He walked to the counter. The innkeeper, a broad man with kind eyes, greeted him. You look like you've been on the road a long time. Corin managed a nod. I need a room. Of course. Food, too. Yes, Corin rasped. The innkeeper poured ale and set out stew with thick bread. Corin sat at a corner table, watching the fire crackle. The warmth seeped into his bones, but he shivered despite it. He heard the others around him talking about harvests, lost livestock, small misfortunes. None spoke of fog or voices or the things that waited in old woods. The whispers in his mind quieted, as if listening. Waiting. Corin finished his meal. When the innkeeper brought the key to his room, he hesitated. Long road behind you? The man asked. Corin swallowed. He looked at the fire, seeing faces in its shifting glow. Longer than most. The innkeeper waited, patient. Corin drew a slow breath. Do you want to hear a story? The man raised an eyebrow. I always do. And so Corin began to speak, the words rough at first, but growing steady. He told the innkeeper about Hollowmere, about the arch, about the fog that remembered, and the man listened. Corin climbed the narrow stairs to his room, the key cold in his palm. The corridor was quiet, floorboards creaking underfoot. He paused outside the door, listening. Inside his head, the voices were hushed, waiting. He turned the key slowly and pushed the door open. The room was small but clean. A narrow bed sat under the slanted roof, a single window looking out over moonlit fields. A wash basin and a battered chair completed the furnishings. Corin shut the door behind him, leaning against it. He let out a slow breath and closed his eyes. "You spoke," the whispers murmured, quieter than ever. He didn't answer aloud. He crossed to the window and unlatched it. Cool night air spilled in, carrying the scent of cut grass and hearth smoke. He rested his elbows on the sill, staring at the stars. They were so bright out here. In the fog, there had been no sky, only choking gray, pressing from all sides. He felt the weight in his chest shift, settling. The stories no longer clawed to escape, but pressed against his ribs like sleeping animals, warm and heavy. He turned back to the room, set his pack on the floor, sat in the chair, elbows on knees. He remembered the faces carved in stone, the chained ones in the hollow, the revenant at the clearing's heart. He closed his eyes and spoke their names, if he remembered them. He described their faces to the dark. When he finished, he sat in silence. The voices within were quiet, listening. Finally, he rose and lay on the narrow bed. The mattress was thin, the blanket scratchy, but it was safe. He let his eyes drift shut, feeling sleep wrap around him. Outside, the world turned slowly, unaware of the burden he carried. But he would remember enough for all of them. He slept, the whispers quiet. When dawn broke, it filled the small room with pale light, turning the worn floorboards gold. Corin woke slowly, eyes gritty with exhausted sleep. He sat up, rubbing at his face. For a moment, he felt the crushing silence of the fog, the cold weight of countless whispers pressing in. He braced himself for the roar of them, but they were quiet. Not gone, but resting. He exhaled, shoulders sagging. He stood and crossed to the wash basin, splashing cold water over his face. Watching his reflection blur and clear in the rippling surface, he remembered the memory pool. What you carry, what you cannot forget. He dressed, gathering his few belongings. He checked the journal in his pack, running fingers over its cracked spine. The ink was faded, the pages brittle, but it was proof. Proof they had lived. He left the room, stepping into the narrow hall. Downstairs the inn was stirring to life, the hearth crackling, bread baking in the oven. The innkeeper gave him a nod. "Sleep well." Corin hesitated. "I did." The man waited, leaning on the counter. "You heading out today?" Corin looked at the door. Beyond it lay a world that knew nothing of fog and hunger, but also paths that led to forgotten places. "I think so," Corin said slowly. He paid for the room and the meal. He lingered a moment at the door. "Thank you," he said. The innkeeper smiled. "Safe travels, friend." Corin opened the door and stepped out into the morning. The road lay before him, dust shining in the slanting sun. He felt the weight in his chest shift, the memories waiting. He walked. Corin followed the winding path away from the village, boots kicking up pale dust. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last tatters of mist. Birdsong filled the air. He paused to listen, the sound clear and unbroken by whispers. He smiled faintly, but the memories were there, curled in the dark of his mind. Faces, names, please. He adjusted the pack on his shoulder, feeling the weight of the journal inside. He had read it so many times he knew the words by heart. "Forgive us." He walked on. At crossroads, he chose the path that led toward distant rooftops, smoke rising in thin lines. Settlements, places where people gathered. He remembered the guide's words. "You can choose to forget, or you can remember for them." He pressed a hand to his chest. "I'll remember." Ahead, he saw a farmer mending a fence. The man straightened, squinting at Corin. "Traveling far?" he called. Corin nodded. "Far enough." Danger on the roads? Corin paused. He could see the old arch in his mind, the village choked with fog, the chained ones, the watcher at the gate. Not here, he said softly. The farmer nodded, satisfied, returning to his work. Corin walked on. At the edge of the next village, he stopped. Watched children chase each other, shrieking laughter. Saw the open doors of homes, unafraid. He took a deep breath. He would stop here. He would tell the innkeeper a story. He would sit by a fire and speak of Hollowmere. And he would remember, because someone had to. The inn at the village edge was small but welcoming. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the promise of stew and warm bread. Corin pushed open the door, blinking in the dim light. The room fell quiet for a moment, eyes turning to the road-worn traveler. He felt their curiosity press against him, but did not shrink from it. The innkeeper, a woman with streaks of gray in her hair, raised an eyebrow. "Come in, stranger." "Hungry," Corin nodded. "And thirsty." She waved him toward the fire. "Sit. We'll see to you." He settled into a chair near the hearth. Flames danced and crackled, casting long shadows on the floor. He felt the heat sink into his bones, driving away the chill that lived in him now. The other patrons returned to their talk, the clink of mugs and low laughter filling the space. But the innkeeper watched him from behind the counter, curious. When she brought his meal, she lingered. "Long way you've come." Corin nodded. "Longer than most would want." She tilted her head. "Care to tell it?" He looked at the fire, the way it twisted and hissed. He thought of the fog, the cold, the pleading faces. He swallowed. "I can't." She pulled up a stool. "Then do." Corin drew a slow breath. He began to speak. He told them of Hollowmere, of the arch, of the fog that remembered everything you tried to forget. The room grew quiet. No laughter now, only the fire's crackle and his voice, steady, careful. When he finished, the innkeeper placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "That's worth remembering." Corin closed his eyes. The whispers inside him settled. He would stay tonight. Tomorrow he would move on, and he would keep telling the story. Corin spent the night at the hearth, speaking softly until his voice cracked. The innkeeper listened without interruption, eyes bright in the firelight. A few other patrons drew closer, mugs in hand, frowns deepening as they heard of Hollowmere in the fog. He described the arch with its pulsing runes, the silent village, the circle of standing stones where voices spoke through cold earth, the chained ones who warned too late. When he faltered, the whispers in his mind urged him on, nudging him to remember every detail. Faces, words, cries swallowed by fog. He obeyed them. He let the memory live in his voice. At last he fell silent. The fire burned low. The room held its breath. The innkeeper cleared her throat, voice low. "Dark tale. Is it true?" Corin met her eyes, too tired to lie. "Yes." She studied him a long moment, then poured him another cup of ale. "Then it's good you told it." He accepted the drink with shaking hands. The whispers within quieted, content for now. When he rose to go to his bed, he paused at the doorway to the stair. He looked back at the people sitting in silence, the fire painting them in gold and shadow. "Remember it," he said softly, "so it doesn't happen again." No one spoke, but no one looked away either. He climbed the narrow stairs and collapsed onto the thin mattress. Sleep came fitful, filled with memories that were no longer nightmares, but burdens he had agreed to carry. By dawn, his voice was raw, but his heart was steady. He was the storyteller now, and the memory would live because he would not let it die. He left the inn before sunrise, stepping onto a road wet with dew. The world was hushed in that gentle, waiting silence before dawn fully bloomed. Corin adjusted the pack on his shoulder. The old journal inside was battered from countless readings, pages smudged with dirt and oil. He ran his thumb over the spine. "Forgive us." He remembered the guide's words in the heart of the fog. "You can forget, or you can carry it." He turned his hand over. Faintly, he saw the scar on his palm where the blood and ink had mixed in the scriptorium. He had marked himself then, a promise he hadn't fully understood at the time. He understood now. The road forked often. At each branch, he chose the path that led toward smoke on the horizon. Church steeples rising over trees, the shapes of other lives moving unaware in the distance. He spoke to farmers on fences, to merchants riding wagons heavy with wares. When they asked where he'd come from, he didn't just name places. He named stories. A village swallowed by fog, a revenant bound in memory, a guide with hollow eyes who had once been lost himself. Not everyone listened. Some laughed him off. Some frowned and hurried away. But some stayed. Some asked questions. And those he told everything. When he lay down at night by firelight, the whispers inside him were quieter, settled, as though they approved, as though they were finally being heard. Corin's travels led him deeper into country few visited, along roads broken with weeds and roots. He sought the places marked only by rumor, villages abandoned, churches burned out, fields choked in brambles. He found them. He stood in a chapel with no roof, moss growing over its altar. He whispered to the empty air about Hollowmere, about the memory pool. He sat by a crumbling well, stones tumbled into its throat. He traced symbols into the dirt beside it, the spiral in the eye, careful and deliberate. He stood before an arch of fallen stones that reminded him of the one he first crossed. He spoke to it until his throat was raw. And always, he listened. Sometimes, in the hush before dawn, he thought he heard whispers in return. Not the pleading, hungry voices of the fog, but softer, curious, listening back. In these places no one lived anymore, but Corin felt them shift as he told his stories, as if the land itself was remembering. He walked on. His boots wore down, his clothes frayed, his voice cracked, but he didn't stop. He carried a promise in every breath. They will not be forgotten. And though he walked alone, he never felt alone. The fog had marked him, but it had given him purpose. Years passed, though he marked them only in changing seasons. Corin's hair grew long, streaked with gray. Lines carved themselves into his weathered face. But his eyes were clear. One autumn evening, he came to a clearing he did not recognize. In the dying light, he saw an arch of ancient stones standing amid fallen leaves. Its surface was cracked with age, symbols nearly worn away. He froze. His breath clouded. The air was still. No fog crawled through the trees. No whisper rose from the earth. But something watched. Something waited. He approached slowly. He rested a hand on the cool stone. Symbols flared, faintly, just for a moment. Memories surged in him. The silent village. The chained ones. The revenant's plea. Remember us. Corin closed his eyes. Tears streaked his dirt-caked cheeks. I do, he whispered. Silence greeted him. But it was not empty. It was full of listening. He lowered his pack to the ground. Opened the journal one more time. He read the names he'd written. Faces he'd described, the words he'd carried. When he finished, he set the book at the base of the arch. He rested his palm against it one last time. Then he turned away. He didn't look back, but he kept speaking, even with no one to hear, because the land was listening, and the memory would endure. Winter settled over the land in silence, blanketing fields and forest in white. Corin's breath hung in the cold air as he walked the road, his boots crunching through frost. He was old now, his back bent, his voice thin. But he still spoke. To every village he entered, he told his story. Some children ran from him in fear. Some wept. Some sat wide-eyed by firelight, repeating the words after him. He taught them the symbols, the spiral, the eye. He showed them how to carve them in wood and stone and memory. He lay under open skies when he grew too tired to stand. He watched stars that burned with cold indifference. He felt the weight inside him lighten, spread, dissipate like breath in the frozen air. The whispers in his head grew quiet, not silenced, but calm. You kept us. He smiled faintly. I did. Snow fell, soft and gentle. He closed his eyes. He was no longer in the inn, or the village square, or the forest path. He was everywhere he had spoken, every ear that had listened. His breath rattled once. The wind blew over the snow, whispering through bare branches. And its voice was a memory of fog, of pleading, of hunger, but also of a man who had carried them. Remember. And so they did. The wind moved on, carrying stories over fields and through valleys, leaving the world quieter, older, but no longer willing to forget. And the last whisper faded into silence. But the memory remained. The end.